Yeah, thank you, Rafi, and thank you, Aletta, for coming to us visually, timely, intellectually, even though not physically, but this can be delayed for later. So I'm doing this introduction because Nicole can't be here. The date for this presentation had to be changed, and Nicole cannot join today, so that's why I'm here. So it's a great pleasure. Aletta Bonn is coming to us, and I'm going to give a short introduction about her career. Aletta Bonn studied biology and English in Berlin. Then she did a master in Bangor on marine environmental protection. She did a biology diploma in Braunschweig and also her PhD in Braunschweig on conservation biology. Then she went for more than 10 years, for 12 years, to England. She was a postdoctoral research associate in Sheffield. She was research manager in the Park District National Park. So she gained quite a lot of experience, I guess, on practical and conceptual nature conservation. She was also linked to universities in Sheffield. She was manager of IUCN UK peatland program and visiting fellow at the Rural Economy and Land Use program. In 2012, she moved back to Germany, to the University FU in Berlin as a research fellow in the Institute of Biology, and then later she moved to UFZ, to Leipzig, where she has been appointed professor in 2014, and she has a joint professorship at the UFZ in Leipzig and at the Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research, iDiv, in Halle. And as she told me just before, she is located in Leipzig. Beside that, Aletta Bonn has a couple of, or many, other activities and engagements. She is member of the International Unit for Conservation of Nature. She is chair of the IPBES working group of the Ecological Society of German, Austria, and Switzerland. She is lead author of the IPBES assessment, Land Degradation and Restoration Assessment, review editor for IPBES Catalog of Policy Support Tools and Methodology. And she's founding director and board member of the European Citizen Science Association. And there are a couple of other things. I don't want to take too much time to follow up. Her research focus is on biodiversity and ecosystem services and trend analysis. She's working on telecoupling of ecosystem service, interregional flows and socio-ecological systems, on biodiversity, ecosystem services and human health, and on citizen science for biodiversity. And she's doing research on that and published a lot, and I guess a lot of public work and application work, which is linked to that. So if I forgot something quite important, please correct me. And otherwise, I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your invitation and for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very excited. And of course, I would love to visit your center as well, because it's obviously, I think Switzerland is doing really great. And I think it's exciting to watch what's happening. And so thank you very much for your invitation. So I will share my screen now and I hope this works. Okay, I hope you can all see this. If I could just hear an auditory signal.
Yes, it's fine.
Fantastic. Okay. So thank you very much for your invitation. And I would like to, so the title of my talk today is titled Biodiversity Observation Networks are People Networks. And so my research is really concerned what is the linkage between biodiversity and people, but also how do we work? And I think, so the main mantra is that we have to think from the people perspective in order then to also build up biodiversity observation networks. In my talk, I would like to give you, first of all, an overview of what the political situation is and how we can work, then give you some more in-depth examples how we can use, for example, citizen science data as well as structured data in order to develop important biodiversity pattern analyses, and give you some insight into our sMon program, where we're analyzing biodiversity trends for Germany. And then also branch out at the very end to give you some information of two new initiatives which we're starting, the National Data Research Infrastructure for Biodiversity in Germany, as well as Aletta Bonn, the European Biodiversity Observation Network, at the very end. But I'm just going to mention this and invite you. Hopefully we can work together there. But what are we facing at the moment? Oops, I'm sorry. Yeah. We're writing 2021, which means we have actually missed the 2020 targets of the CBD, Convention of Biological Diversity, and we have already also missed the 2010 targets of the Convention of Biological Diversity. We have a very good setup, actually, of policies for biodiversity, and also very ambitious targets. And as you know, the CBD is going to meet soon in order to identify the new targets for the Biodiversity Vision 2050. And here we're also working very closely with the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. And we have a new body, so not so new anymore, the IPBES, International Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, who is providing the scientific support in order to strengthen this. But what we can see is that we have missed a lot of the targets so far, and we have to vamp up our game so that in 10 years' time, we, and I mean everybody in this virtual room and everybody else, we don't have to say we'll miss these targets again. But why is this? We have around 8 million species. I mean, there are different estimates, but they are largely devoid from what matters to people. What matters to people are, for example, ecosystem services, for example, energy, health, especially in Corona times, we notice this, education, flood mitigation protection, food, pollution protection. But this is rarely connected, and people don't see that biodiversity is our life support system. And what we need to do in science, as well as a society and in policy, is that we need to understand, but then also change the complex interactions of people and biodiversity as they are now. I would say that we have the policy framework for this, which we can improve and which we must improve as well. We also need to understand this, and we have to build biodiversity observation networks which take this into place. And the European Green Deal, where also Ursula von der Leyen pushed a biodiversity strategy now, 2030 for Europe, already through, where it says Europe must lead the transition to a healthy planet and a new digital world, but it can only do so by bringing people together. And I think this is what we have to really understand and then also live in our research, but also how we work. Because it is high time that we bend the curve of biodiversity loss and move to solutions. This is obviously the classical paper from Georgina Mays, who I think has been an eminent scientist and has always pushed the boundaries. And I hope that that she led the way in this, and that we can now, as scientists, then see, okay, where do we want to be in 2030? Where do we want to be in 2050? And what I already said is that we have obviously here in the graph, we can see that we have a very good policy framework already with international plans as well as national plans. But we really have to see how we can now bend the curve in order to, despite that we can move the biodiversity index up. And I don't need to tell you about this. You know all this, that we have seen a constant decline. It could have been, maybe it would have been worse without these policies, but nevertheless we see declines. And how can we move towards this? And how can we actually move towards this so that biodiversity becomes hip, that actually people want to engage, and that it's not only a lip service from policy, but also that we move towards action. We know that Some of the policies, the big agricultural policies, for example, they're not necessarily pointing towards this. And here in Germany, we also have, we're not making strong enough moves to this. It's great to hear that we're obviously making progress with climate policies, but we really have to move on and make a difference now. But how can we do this? And how can we then make this a juicy cake or pancake layer where everybody wants to participate, and where we see this as something which is an investment and which is something which we want to have instead of something which we have to do and which is sort of on the side and where we don't really want to engage. So how can we make this juicy as biologists, as scientists, and how can we work together and have people in the foreground? For this, we need to develop biodiversity observation networks, and what is needed, the ingredients here, is not only the awareness. I think we still have to do more on awareness, but a recent, some paper which we published last year on pollinator policies was that the main thing was on awareness, but we have to move on. We also have to develop trust between the different sectors. For example, between the land use sectors and the conservation sectors. Land use is forestry, agriculture, water, and others, but also urban planning. And that we provide support to the communities and provide added value services as biodiversity observation networks. Here in Germany, we're moving ahead with the NFDI for biodiversity, the National Research Data Infrastructure for Biodiversity. And at a European level, we are building the Aletta Bonn, which my colleague Enrique Pereira in iDiv is the chair, and with many colleagues across Europe. So where I want to, if we look at biodiversity observation networks, what do we have already? I think we have a lot of information, both in Germany as well as in Switzerland and in Europe. And what we're usually concerned about is that we say, okay, well, there are spatial differences, there are temporal differences. We have to look at drivers, we have to look at different contexts and obviously different taxonomies. And the usual way is that we sort of think about the technical designs. How do we get all these data layers across each other, and how do we do this? I would argue this is a technical issue. It is definitely a challenge, and bringing this together is a lot of work. But what we often forget is that behind that is also stakeholders who own the data, who bring the data forward. And these may be from government agencies, they may be natural history societies, they may be natural environment, NGOs, as well as private people. And we often forget about this. And my credo would be here that we have to think from the other way around, that we have to think about the stakeholders who are there already, because we have a lot of data, and how we can work here to build a network in order then to build a biodiversity observation network. Because too often we go from a top-down design, that we think about how can we standardize the sampling sites and methods, how can we define strict standards for data collection protocols, for data mobilization and quality, and how can we ensure a highly controlled and structured design. Obviously, this is needed as a backbone, but I would argue, as I said before, we need to think about the development of the stakeholder network first, and the capacity building of partners so that they can all contribute and own this and bring this forward, because this is a task which is huge and which cannot be carried out by themselves. So who is involved? There may be, as I said, there may be agencies, there may be citizen scientists, there may be natural history societies, also research institutions, as well as businesses and individual people, and they all make the stakeholder. This is, we have fragmented data, we have a fragmented data situation, but also fragmented stakeholder situation. And here we need to actively invest in societal and political engagement to align the schemes and to derive high quality information on the state of biodiversity. Here we do know that we have a lot of activities in society, and here I just show some pictures of successful citizen science projects, which are obviously due to the rise of opportunities with social media and also mobile devices are actually seeing an exponential rise, which is great. And here we have to see how can we work together, how can we use this energy, because there are lots of people engaged. And I would like to say citizen science to me is the engagement in science when it is not your day job. So this doesn't mean anything about the quality of or the expertise, because we can differentiate, or we have a gradient from absolute beginners to absolute experts who may have greater expertise for some taxa, for example, than we have maybe at universities. And what we have to see here is that simply generating and communicating scientific knowledge is not sufficient to combat biodiversity loss. It's also not sufficient to do policies. We have to identify and also embrace the knowledge of traditional and ordinary citizens as possibilities for innovation. And here I see innovation not only with regards to data, but also how we do science, what science is being done, but then also how this is transported into practice and policy. And here we also have quite a range of citizen science projects at iDiv and also in my group. However, this is not going to be the main part of my talk. But just to mention this, we are at the moment developing the citizen science strategy white paper for Germany, and we're doing this in collaboration. We had a big process for this, where we're doing this in collaboration with partners from Switzerland and Austria. And I see that there is quite a lot, there's very much happening in Switzerland, which is great to see. And I'm glad that we're joining forces, because to bring this forward, and we're also developing a handbook on citizen science here. But this is not going to be the main part of my talk, but here I think we should see this as innovation and also be creative, how we can use this, and not only as citizen science, not primarily as data providers, but also giving ideas, owning the processes and carrying them forward. Because we see that there is no innovation with participation. This is an old slogan, but at least for Germany, we have annual reports by Wissenschaft im Dialog, where we have surveys, and we can see that 30% of the general public are very keen to get involved in science, but they don't necessarily always know how to. And we also know Europe-wide that 70 to 90% of all species records are actually by volunteers. However, we also see that species experts, it's not only that species are going extinct, but also species experts are silently going extinct. And we have to value and secure this expert knowledge by providing visibility and active participation. But here I see also the part for biodiversity observation networks by professionalizing data management in NGOs and agencies, and to foster this intergenerational contract and to foster learning. And this can only be done in collaboration with NGOs and other institutions where it's their job, so museums, for example, also libraries and so on, so that there can be a broad ownership, but also social license to bring in biodiversity observation networks forward, and not only observation, but also obviously action. And here I would argue that therefore observation networks are called networks. And here we have to clearly see this, that this needs to be a modular approach. We need to see where are the strengths of the different stakeholders, which are the different data types, and how can we then arrive, for example, at species occupancy and abundance, where we can then derive science from. And so we have to develop a collaborative leadership and a sense of shared ownership to promote also resilience in the system and innovation potential. And how we can go about this, and this is what we're doing at the moment in the NFDI, we have to understand what are the motivations, the benefits, but also the impediments and incentives, for example, for working together. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but for example, for state authorities, the motivation is obviously that they have a legal obligation and reporting duties. The benefits of joining a biodiversity observation network is obviously accessibility to information on states and trends of biodiversity, which may otherwise not be available. Impediments which we see is that the agencies are chronically understaffed, at least in Germany. There may be limited communication. Maybe there's also maybe they could also be afraid of concern of losing sovereignty about this. But the incentives would be added value through buy-in through stakeholders, and this is what we get a lot from our agencies: transparency and increased importance and visibility. The same might be true for NGOs. that they see that their motivation is maybe different, that they also need to look at member integration, and they may perceive that biodiversity observation there may be a perceived loss of own visibility. But really, we should turn this on its head and say, well, it's going to be more visibility, and that's why we have to create biodiversity observation networks that create more visibilities for the different owners. And it's a lot about visibility, so that we can all increase the evidence base, which can then help everybody and also increase self-efficacy. Here, for example, this is my point. It would be great for social scientists to really study this. How is this happening? And then to see how is this moving forward. And then natural history societies, for example, face the impediments that there might be funding and past capacity issues, but an incentive might be that they can actually work with statistical experts to actually harness the wealth of information which they have. So if we want to achieve integration, we suggest a framework that you first identify the stakeholders, not just the data, first of all the stakeholders, and embrace diversity and welcome this. We are very diverse, and that's great because it's going to add this. These fragmented stakeholders need to be there. We need to turn this into a network, and we have to see where are the network nodes. Then we can link those networks and then identify how from the social network we can go about the technical design of aligning the data which there are, so that we can unify stakeholders around a core standardized monitoring program and observation program. And I see that some of this is actually happening where we can learn from best practice. And yeah, it would be great to move towards this, and that we can do this obviously at different scales, at different geographical scales, and work together. Because I truly believe that we have to. It's harnessing the existing modules and empowering them to work together. So one project which we're doing in iDiv is the sMon project, analyzing biodiversity trends in Germany, where we are now having all experts from all 16 federal states, which is great. The BFN, our conservation agency, National Conservation Agency, naturalistic societies, museums, the big NGOs, as well as research institutes. And we've so far now had our 5th working group meeting. And the main thing is here to bridge science, society, and policy, and where we can see that we have a lot of information on biodiversity, often in so-called grey literature or not available at the moment, but that in sMon we can use as a community, for example, novel statistical methods for heterogeneous data, to then combine this with spatial data for environmental and site characteristics to then arrive at trend analyses. And obviously in iDiv we can provide some of the infrastructure, heavy infrastructure, also to compute these. And we're focusing here on some taxa in order to do national-wide trend analyses. And I think I'm going to be a little bit quick on the next few slides, because it deals with how we deal with incomplete and heterogeneous data. And we've published this in here, actually in a German-speaking Natur und Landschaft, in order to also, with our colleagues from the agencies and naturalistic societies, to show what happens. So because often we don't have a complete species list, if we do this, we can use GLMs, that's easy. If we don't, we have to think about what information do we have, and we can use different statistical tools. And I'm just going to explain the occupancy detection models, where we then account for the processes we see, rather than criticizing that some of the things are not standardized. We have to work with it in our statistical models. So usually we can see we have an ecological process, and in a structured survey, the ecological process might be like this. The observation process would be exactly equal across all those, across the whole of the ecological process, and therefore the estimated observation process would be also that it's equal, and therefore if we then estimate the ecological process in our statistical models, it would actually be very close to reality. However, in citizen science project, we have the same ecological process, but the observation process may be different. For example, there's a spike of activity when the citizen science project has been announced, an atlas is being done, phenology, people go out more in spring or whatever. And then the observation process, for some reason or other, is unequal across the different ecological processes. However, usually in our statistical models, we assume a same observation effort, and therefore in our models, we may not be able to recognize this ecological process. But if we account for this, so if we then, usually we say, okay, we have to do something about our observation process. Sometimes we have to live with this. So if we then use our observation process, if we model the observation process, if we have information about this, we can then see, okay, we could close it. If we know how the observation process was, we can get closer in our analysis and our statistical analysis about the ecological process which lies underneath. So by using occupancy detection models, we look at the occupancy, which is the ecological process, and then the detection probability, the observation process, to then arrive at more realistic observation records. This is another way of explaining this. We have an ecological process beneath this, which is there we have our observer. This observer might miss some of this, and the observation pattern might be like this. But if we know how the observation process was, we can come at more nearer realistic observation records, so that we look at occurrence, detection probability into observation records. Which is then that we can see observations might be these are the sites. Observations might differ across time, but if we have a process to account for this, we can account for these variations in detection probabilities. So I come to my first case study, dragonflies and damselflies. This is a project which was or analysis which have been led by Diana Bowler, and here we work with dragonfly partners from the different agencies, and especially from the Gesellschaft Deutschsprachiger Odontologen and Natural History Society. And it was a great collaboration. This took actually quite some years because it's quite difficult to accumulate all the data. Here you can see the data coverage across the different, across Germany. We can see, obviously, it's not equal. It's not even, but we can account for this, and there are some hotspots, obviously, which may be also observer hotspots. But we covered here 77 of 81 species present in Germany. And the paper should be coming out anytime, so I hope you can read this. So what we could do is for the different Länder or states, we could develop trend analyses with occupancy models. But also for the whole of Germany. And as you can see, the patterns are different. So the dragonflies and damselflies, we can see some winners and we can see some losers. And overall, we can see that we have quite a few increasing species, which is good news, but also decreasing species. And we obviously have also distribution changes between the first and the last year. Here we could collate over more than 1 million species records over the last 35 years. And we have range expanding species like the Feuerlibellen, scarlet darter, and which are often species of running waters or fresh waters, and they use a range of habitats, and they may also be warm adapted. Whereas we have others like the Schwarze Heidelibelle, black darter, which use stunning waters as well as bogs and peatlands, and where we have decreases in general over the species. So if we look at general patterns of traits of species which are winners and losers, we have to differentiate between winners who may have a higher temperature preferences, so which are winners maybe with changing climate, and but also a slight ephenology issues also when the start of the flight period is. Those larger species with high mobility, with longer wings or larger wing lengths, also increase, and those which are more long-lived increase. In general, we see a recovery of those species which use rivers, so that we think that the Water Framework Directive and restoration efforts have actually kicked in. This is a good news, but we also see obviously declines in those species which are very specific to peatland habitats and where we see drastic declines. So overall good news, but we have to see it differentiated. So climate change has encouraged range expansion of some species, also called neonatives. River restoration, including wastewater treatments, may have allowed the recovery of river species, but we call it recovery because we go only back to the 1980s. A lot of the damage has probably been done already in the 70s and 80s. And what we now want to look at is what is the interaction between the two. And also in the last 10 years, we actually see a decline again. So we have to see what happened there. And this is analyses are ongoing, and we're working with the Dragonfly community. The second example I'd like to give is the plant analysis led by David Eichenberg. And here we were really lucky to be able to, so David was able to collate spatial-temporal data of plant diversity over the last 60 years. Here we call the conservation agency, BFN, came to us and said, we have got a treasure trove, the floor card data set of 70 million records. And David enhanced this with data from the different agencies as well as literacy societies and private individuals to have more than 29 million records across the whole of Germany between over the last 60 years. And we work in raster quadrants for over 2,000 species, which is about 55 of all vascular plant species in Germany. And here we can see that we again have winners, so a similar graph, but also losers. And we can see that 70% of all investigated plant species show a decline of occupancy. This doesn't mean that they're totally extinct, but we see that there is a decline in occupancy, and this is really important to see. And this is sometimes masked by red list data because we don't look at sort of some minor changes where we see occupancy losses. We could, here we use the Frascalo algorithm to model the species distribution in Germany for over 2,000 plant species, and we can see that there are differentiated patterns of both losses in blue and increases in red. So, for example, Impatiens glandulifera increased across the whole of Germany, but others, for example, decreased very much and are now restricted to only some few patches here. And we have these for all species under investigation. And if we then look at different floristic status groups, we can see that if we look over the down here, over the past 60 years overall, we can see that natives blue is here a decrease. The natives decreased, and especially in the areas and the marine coastal areas, as well as close to the Alps. And a huge contribution of this is from archaeophytes, which have actually experienced the biggest losses already in the 1960s to 1980s. And only then, afterwards, neophytes came onto board, which increased in the last 2 decades and have then increased. But what we can see from these patterns, and we're analyzing them at the moment now, is that these patterns are not necessarily congruent. There doesn't seem to be the same drivers, or not in all regions, and not for these different floristic status groups. And the neophytes have not managed to, for example, fill the gaps of losses which were otherwise. So here we have to really look into what are the different drivers across the different regions. And we at the moment are analyzing these with different traits, and hope to, and also other data sets, long-term time series data sets. And another publication which was led by Florian Jansen, we could see that it was for just one federal state in the north, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. We could see that if we look at occupancy rates, it is actually the moderately common species which have decreased the most. Rare species will always be rare, but what we see is that it's the moderately common species, in which are often lost in monitoring schemes, which have seen the greatest decline. And therefore, also, if we build up biodiversity observation monitoring networks, we have to look at across a range of species, and also look at common species, which may also provide some of the key services which we provide and have possible trophic repercussions. So, coming to an end with sMon, here I would just say this was possible by bringing people together and working and actually having the luxury to be able to work with many different experts who have been working on this over the many decades, who are now coming together in order to ask the questions, first of all, ask this together, and then analyze them. And I'm very happy that we have the sMon network, which is now really, which is also a lot of fun to be together and actually talk science. And then we obviously hope that some of this, because we're doing this together with the agencies, they can carry it forward straight away into management plans as well. And we're very happy that we are able to work with all the natural history societies and big national history societies in Germany, which actually have the taxonomic expertise, but also the data. And it's been very enriching. So I do hope that I could present an example how biodiversity observation networks can be built and how people are most important in order to build this, so that we can then arrive at evidence-based information for biodiversity change. On this note, I would like to now, in order to finish my talk, just mention two new initiatives or big programs which we're starting. Is the Nationale Forschungsdateninfrastruktur für Biodiversität, NFDI for Biodiversity. We're working with partners from data centers, infrastructure providers, computer science, biological and environmental sciences, but also teaching and training together in order to build up a national research data infrastructure. This is a big program pushed by by Germany as a federal state and the different federal states, and then administered by our research foundation, DFG, Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, and which is a program which is set to go for the next 10 years. So we've got funding for 5 years now in order to build this up, and this obviously builds on efforts which have been already built up by GFBio. Some of you may know this program already, and I placed our website down here. And what we hope to provide of the future is that we can actually combine the different work with the different facets of biodiversity. At the moment, I talked about occurrence data and distributions, but obviously we have also ecosystem data, experiments, functional traits, collection data, molecular data, also model outputs, and linked to obviously remote sensing and satellite data, which are hosted by different organizations. And if we can bring these together, that we can then hear from a good NFDI for biodiversity, and it would be great to also hear from your progress and how you're doing this in Switzerland. I'd be really keen to, and that we could collaborate on this. So, and here, just to on one detail, I'm leading the To Involve work package together with colleagues. And what we're doing is that we have 23 use cases where we're trying to actually be very focused so that we can actually deliver, because this is obviously a huge task, and where we have use cases from academia, and also collection data centers like the big museums, but also agencies. So we're working with 3 federal agencies, as well as so archives, but also societies and citizen science, where we're working with the big natural history societies, but also, for example, with 2 national parks, in order to see how can a national data infrastructure be useful to them. And what is really exciting now in Germany is that we've also just started the BFN, so the Bundesamt für Naturschutz, started the Biodiversity Monitoring Center, which is great. We also have a red list data center. And so I'm very hopeful that a lot is happening, and I hope that we can all work towards then our biodiversity goal, and each with our expertises and skills, and that we can manage to here come together to actually provide a greater good. So that in NFDI for biodiversity, we can provide support with infrastructure and with tools for early mobilization, provide a front and back office with research data management support, and really support hands-on, also provide education and training, and obviously also quality surveys, which we've just started. We're still building the teams, and yeah, it will be great to work together. At a European level, we're starting Europa Bonn, and where we're working with many partners across Europe, and where stakeholder engagement is actually and co-design is one of our principles, in order then to develop a way how we can align data streams, integrate models, and work towards essential biodiversity variables, to then actually feed into policy indicators and scenarios. And so in order to do this, one of our first action is actually to have so this is our partnership. One of our first action is actually to have a kickoff stakeholder meeting, which is actually being invited by the heads of the Directorate for Environment and Research from the EU, or from the European Commission. And I would like to invite you to also participate. This is on the 26th and 28th of May. The registration is open. If you go onto the website, you will see this. And we would also, if maybe some of you are already, but please also consider becoming a member of the Aletta Bonn partnership, and that we here hopefully can what I've just provided as a concept, that we can here build together a European Biodiversity Observation Network. And with this, I would like to thank you. I hope we can build a juicy cake where everybody wants to participate, where there are different aspects, where there are different modules, and that we can work together. And I would like to thank my most immediate collaborators, and obviously I already said we're working with many collaborators, but in my team, Diana Bauler and David Eichenberg, and also the close collaboration with Hjalmar Kühl, who led the paper on biodiversity integration, and the whole sMon team. Thank you very much.